You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sophie's Group.
Hello, welcome back to the podcast, episode 267. Adrian and Paul with you again, but this time coming live from Dongguan, South China. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Adrian. Good to see you in the office. So very sort of warm welcome to the office here. I know you've been here before, but it's good to be shoulder to shoulder, as it were, for the British invasion.
Yeah, absolutely. And so speaking of that, if you're wondering, okay, these guys again, well, a couple of weeks ago, we recorded part 1 of your top 10 questions that people normally have about Chinese contract manufacturers. And in that podcast episode, which I'll leave the link to in case you need to go back to it, we covered the common challenges when working with Chinese manufacturers. That was quite a long section, that was, because obviously you could talk about that forever, basically.
Yeah, I did mention it at the time. But
yeah. Effective communication, handling product defects and quality issues, if and how Chinese manufacturers can help with your product design and development. And you sort of covered some of the best regions in China to find suitable contract manufacturers as well. And actually, they're not only in one place. There's all sorts of different regions, and it kind of depends on the kind of product that you make.
It does, yeah. So small electronics manufacturing plants tend to be in the south, where the heavy industrial stuff is up in the north, and a few scattered in between. We went over that in the last podcast, so yeah, if you're interested in that, go and have a listen.
Absolutely. And so that was questions 1 to 5. So without further ado, let's get into it. And question number 6 says, well, what are the differences between working with small versus large manufacturers in China? And you kind of did allude to this in the last one as well, but yeah, let's go into a bit more detail.
Yeah, I think we've covered some of the information on this potentially in the last one or other podcasts we've done in the past.
Yeah.
But again, Adrian, I must warn you that this is an area that could go on for several podcasts in its own right.
Maybe next time. I'm looking at the time.
So what I'll do is I'll rattle through some of these points that I've got down, and hopefully I'll pick on the correct ones that'll help you decide which size you really should be working with from a contract manufacturer point of view that best suits your product, let's say. So what are the main differences between the small and large? Well, you got to look at the production capability and the capacity of the manufacturer that you're looking for. So this, again, most of these points will be determined by your product. So there's no one answer fits every single product or one solution. And it's really a case of case-by-case scenario with respect to sort of matching up your requirements against what a contract manufacturer can offer. Like I said, there's some of the large manufacturing contract manufacturers out there. They will be looking at only taking on orders with very high volumes. So you may get turned away. For example, if you approach some contract manufacturers, you're doing some research on, you think these guys are awesome, look at the size of them, and you come in with a potential order of 2,000 units a year, they may turn you away. So that's one thing to consider. Now, one thing you will find with the larger manufacturers is they will have multiple production lines. In other words, they will have multiple capabilities in order to handle a variety of products and designs and specialities, let's say, when it comes to, broad brush, consumer electronics. But, that can cater for every type of products we're looking at. But like I said, they're generally looking for those larger orders. Some of the challenges that you're going to come across when you're talking to some of these larger contract manufacturers would be they potentially going to work with non-startups and people that are not used to manufacturing at all. So they want some background information on you. So they will be interviewing you and not just the other way around. So that's another challenge that you need to get through. And they'll certainly have less flexibility when it comes to deadlines and speciality requirements that you may be looking for, or scope changes or specification changes halfway through design iterations, for example. So, it's not always the best thing to work with large manufacturers. Now, let's look at the small manufacturers. So we're looking at there. So the advantages are basically the opposite of what we just said. They are going to be more flexible because they are more agile and they've got the greater ability to pivot and do various different technologies. So this may be a very good opportunity for you to get in if you've got something like that. Also, they are able to cater for smaller purchase orders, and they're more willing to work with startups and sort of first-time products coming into the market. And basically, they tend to offer more of a personalized service, which is a good thing. However, again, transversely, looking at the challenges, they may have limited capacity if your product is growing and growing and growing. You may outgrow your contract manufacturer from a capability and capacity point of view. So that's something to consider. Not always obvious to start with, but certainly something to consider as you're moving forward. So that's that one thing there you need to look at. Another challenge may be the lack of investment they are willing to put into specialized machinery or equipment. If you were dedicated test equipment that is very complex, they may have, or you may have a challenge getting that in place. So that's something to look at. I've already covered order quantities, but minimum order quantities is a real thing. Okay, and you will come across this regardless of whether you're going for a large manufacturer or small manufacturer, but you're going to definitely see a differentiation between what those MOQs are going to be.
Yeah.
So you're working with a large manufacturer, your MOQ is going to be 10,000 units, for example, versus 1,000 or even less, in some cases when it comes to the smaller manufacturers. So that's good. I've already talked about flexibility, which is a key thing you need to look at. But one of the big things to consider on top of the capacity is quality. You'll tend to find that the larger organizations tend to work with some of the bigger players on the market. Therefore, they have a greater quality process in place. Okay, some of the smaller contract manufacturers or suppliers or factories that you're going to work with will probably have some sort of quality control in place, but you need to do your due diligence. Basically, if you're working with a small contract manufacturer, you definitely need to do your due diligence. Okay, so that's basically the main things there.
So that's your auditing, for example.
Correct. We've talked about due diligence before many, many times. And this is one of the things to consider is the quality aspect of everything moving forward. Like I said, I could go on and on and on about this particular process, but let's move on to the next question anyway.
Well, the next one's a good one. And that's number 7. What are the most common mistakes to avoid when you're working with Chinese contract manufacturers or manufacturers in general, if you like?
Yes, that's right. Let's not keep it down to contract manufacturers. But, if you're looking for a supplier of XYZ or you're going to do tooling or whatever the case may be, there are some common mistakes. And these are some of the questions that we got asked. It's like, what are they? So here's a few pointers. And I've just talked about this. Due diligence. Do your due diligence. If you can't get to China yourself, employ a third-party inspection or audit company to go out and be on the ground and have a look at their facilities, have a look at their quality processes, have a look at their production lines and how they actually operate. Get the third-party auditor to really dig deep into everything that you need in a partner. Make sure you're asking those or get those questions asked.
You can't be taking their word for it. I'm not saying there's always horror stories, but I mean, even certifications, we've seen it that they've been faked in the past, so you can't just receive an email and think, okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Back then, so I'm not so sure now, but back in the day when I was down in Shenzhen, 20 plus years ago, whatever, I literally saw a sign on a shop window, get your ISO certificate here. That's no word of a lie.
No.
So, it's I'm saying they're still done, but you need to do your due diligence.
Yeah.
There's no messing around. Okay. Another point I want to bring up, and again, this is a really, really important one, just behind due diligence, before you jump in, make sure you're looking at the quality control of this contract manufacturer or partner or tooling company, or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure they have clear, defined quality standards in place. Okay, so they must have a process in order to make sure that your parts and everybody else's is coming out of that factory to specification. So many horror stories out there, but this is a real thing. Okay. Next one I want to touch on is something that I did talk about in the last podcast, Adrian, is intellectual property rights. And this is something that you need to take very seriously. And one of the things I did say previously is making sure you get your paperwork in place, as in your NDAs or your NNNs or whatever you want to call them. Make sure you got those non-disclosure agreements in place, and make sure that you are working with a reputable company that has some background. In other words, do your due diligence with respect to talking to previous success stories from that from a customer base. And so try and ask the question, have you got any references that I could talk to with respect to, getting some background story on you? Okay, so don't be shy. Don't be shy about asking these questions, because if they say no, or if they turn you down, that's a red flag. Okay, and that's something to look at with respect to, why are they turning me down? Why don't they want me digging into this?
Before I hand over my IP.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. One for me, one for you story is, it's a real thing. Okay. And the next point I want to pick up on is no surprise communication. And I think this is the theme running through the whole of this top 10. Make sure your communication is clear. If you're emailing and asking questions, email one question at a time, because you'll get a clear answer back. If you ask 10 questions, you'll get an answer back for one or two. You certainly won't get a clear, precise answer on all those 10. So make sure you got clear communication. That's a big downfall and a challenge working with any supplier here in China, potentially in the Far East. Okay. So cultural differences, I'm not going to go into this too much, but there are some cultural differences that you need to understand when dealing with China. Guanxi, I mentioned this last time. It's a real thing. Guanxi is basically making sure that you are friends first before you do business. And it's all about trust. So you need to do that. Build up the trust and build up the relationship over a period of time, and you will get a better service. There's no doubt about that.
Take some finesse. You can't just come and expect everything to be exactly the same as your home country, whether that's in the West or wherever it is. You've got to sort of get to know how the Chinese do business.
Yeah, exactly. Another big one here is prototype straight to production. Okay. If you are developing and producing your own product in a contract manufacturing world, for example, you would go through that new product introduction process, hopefully. And if you skip any of the steps, then that's a big risk on your part. I would strongly and highly recommend that you do not do that. You really need to get samples over to you in your hand. Don't trust. I would say don't trust. This is a strong word. Don't trust the word of your supplier. Okay, it's very, very important. Simply because the supplier does not know what you are expecting. Okay, only you can actually touch it, feel it. You think, okay, this is nice and smooth. This is the correct roughness. This is the correct surface treatment I'm looking for. This is perfect. Or, it's I need some changes. But if you rely on your supplier to make those calls for you, then they're not to know. So trust is a strong word. Don't take their word for it. You are the one that's controlling your product. You're the one that needs to sign the product off, and therefore you need to get samples in place. The only way need to do that is even before you go into production, get pre-production done, get those samples over to you so you can have a feel and put those into certification, testing, field trials, whatever the case may be. It's important. Do not skip that step. So I think, working with suppliers in China, don't make key mistakes. We could go on and on and on. And if you look back, I know we've been through many of these in the past. And some of these are obvious, some of these not so obvious. So, make sure you do your homework before you jump in, basically. So I'll leave that one there. Let's move on to the next question, Adrian.
Number 8, a good one. How do I ensure compliance with international standards such as ISO, CE, FDA? I mean, the list goes on. Because if you're working with a Chinese contract manufacturer or different type of manufacturer, can you be sure that they know how to make sure that products are compliant? And I suppose that's why the question arises.
Yeah, correct. And I've seen this time and time again. Even to the point where I was working, this is many years ago, working with a guy that made something very, very, very simple. Where it was an ice popsicle mold. Okay. And he did not do his due diligence with respect to what material he had to use. Okay. So he had I think it was only half a container. And it was, the plan was he was going to ship these into Amazon and distribute them from Amazon through his business there. Well, these products got stopped at customs in America. They checked for FDA food grade material. Whatever, the material was not approved. Therefore, they seized their products and destroyed his whole batch of products. So he was out of business before he even started business.
How many is in half a container?
An awful lot of the ice popsicle molds. You know what I mean? So something as simple as that, without actually going through the certifications that you require is devastating for the small guy just doing a startup business on something like that. So you need to understand from your side exactly what you need. And this is something that you need to drive and work with your supplier with. Now, again, here I'm going to assume that we're talking about a contract manufacturer that is capable of understanding these sort of things. But it's not down to them to actually determine what your product requires or what markets you're going to be selling into. So you need to make sure that you understand the relevant standards, what your product needs to meet in order for the design team to design in the relevant features or whatever the case may be in order to meet the various different standards. But when it comes to looking at what type of manufacturer to work with, it is clear that there are some standards that the supplier should have in place as well. And some of those, just got a few notes down here. And the obvious one that comes to mind is the ISO 9001 quality management system. So if you're working with a contract manufacturer that doesn't have that, should you really be working with them?
Well, that speaks to the ability to produce the quality that you're looking for, which we mentioned earlier.
Correct.
As well.
Yes, that's right. And all of this goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
It really does. A lot of people out there now are insisting on their suppliers have 14001 or 14001, which is the environmental management. And it's a very hot topic at the moment. Obviously, everyone's going to be careful about dumping waste into rivers and pollution into the air and stuff like this. So which is sort of really important. Have a look for that. See what else they are producing from a customer point of view. Ask questions. Are you producing any products that are going into Europe? Are you producing any products that are going into United States of America, for example? Are you producing any products that are suitable for foods, like the FDA, the Food Drug Administration? And if they answer yes, then you can dig deeper into more questions with respect to how are you testing? What certifications are you able to provide? Now, 9 times out of 10, they will not be able to do this in-house, and they would use a third-party subcontract specialist, someone like SGS or one of the other larger worldwide known certification bodies. However, here in China, there are a lot of local certification houses which may not okay, may not, big question mark, I don't know, be able to provide exactly the right certification for your product requirements. So it's really, really important that you understand what your product needs from a certification point of view and discuss that in depth with your contract manufacturer.
Yeah, you can't leave it to them. You can take their advice.
Absolutely, yeah. Discuss with them, because if they've been doing products of a similar nature, and often the case, you are looking for a contract manufacturer that does consumer electronics or does
Food grade materials.
Ice pop food grade materials, for example. Yeah, so they would have some experience on producing products and putting products through the certification process. This is really important. And again, this comes back again, do your due diligence and ask the questions. Don't be shy about asking any questions. The only stupid question that's not asked is the one that you don't ask.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's really, really important. If you're not confident or comfortable with finding out this information, you need to hire somebody that does understand it. Okay. So not everybody is fully au fait with what certifications they need to put their product through.
Sure.
So you need to do some outreach. Intertech is another one that comes to mind as very, very accessible. These guys will answer emails. They've got a lot of information on the website, and you can search a lot of information with respect to what your product potentially needs. But again, don't leave anything to chance. That's really important that you do that. Internally, we do have a test lab, RSQ Labs, but this is not for certification. This is more of a pre-certification or reliability testing. So, yeah, if you are doing work with us, we're lucky enough to take on your product, or you're lucky enough to work with us, whatever the case might be, however you want to look at it, we can go through the process of pre-certification on certain things, i.e. humidity and temperature drops and temperature shocks. We've got drop testing. We've got various different, we've got a lot actually of test equipment upstairs in our test lab. But again, must reiterate, this is not a certification house. No. We are purely a test house with very good capabilities. Okay. So again, this is an area that I could go on and on and on, Adrian, but I want to skip over to the next question now, number 9. So we're getting close to the end of this now.
That's a good idea.
Cool.
Number 9 is, what are the key factors to consider when you are selecting your Chinese manufacturer?
Well, again, I think you'll see some common trends in the thread here. It's the first one I'll touch on is expertise. It's really what I call horses for courses. Yeah, you're not going to go to highly developed electronics manufacturer for your food grade ice pop molds. Okay. Conversely, you're not going to go to the food grade ice pop molds with your PCB requirements. So you need to look and match your requirements to the expertise that is available in different contract manufacturers or different suppliers here in China. And there's a lot to look out for. So if you're looking for experience and expertise, you're not going to go with a company that's only been open for 6 months.
No.
Okay. So you need to look at how many years they've been in operation. And again, just go back over these previous 10 questions or 8 questions or whatever and ask those questions.
Because due diligence right there.
Correct. Yes, that's right. Ask the question, have you put any products through certification before? Are you capable of producing 1 million units a year? If you think that's the case, therefore you're going to know exactly what you're looking for. So it's matching your requirements with the expertise and experience of a supplier / contract manufacturer here in China. Again, I've already mentioned this in this podcast. Ask for references so you can actually talk to previous companies to get previous companies that have gone through the process with that contract manufacturer to ask their experience. What was your experience like? Were these guys any good? Where did they let you down? Not everything's perfect in life. Every supplier out there will have some hiccups along the way, I'm sure.
Can I ask a question just quickly about that? When we normally go to a manufacturer, in your experience, are they normally quite forthcoming with references and that sort of information?
I would say it's a 70% yes, 30% no.
Okay.
And I've experienced this, and I've got one particular customer that I'm working with here at the moment at Gillian, where we've got a very, very specific supplier that we need to get a very specific product from, and they've turned us down. That they said, no, you can't even visit us.
Wow.
No, you can't. We're not going to give you any references. You can check our website, and that's it. So, which is, it's unusual. Let's say it's unusual. And what are we going to do about it? Well, clearly we're going to go and find a secondary and tertiary, or a second and third supplier as a backup. Because I don't like the fact that when we get the knockback, it tends to be for a reason. Now, I've got a feeling that the reason here is, in this particular case, our MOQ is very small. Our requirement, is very small, and their expectation is very large. So we're quite a way away from expectation points of view. So I think that's the main issue. However, we still get knocked back. So that means it's not necessarily a good fit.
Right.
Okay. And that's something to look out for and consider when looking at or trying to match your expectation with a contract manufacturer or a supplier from their expertise and experience. Okay. Something else I've touched on just a few minutes back is capacity. Making sure that the supplier has the capacity plus some on where you're expecting. Because if you are planning on selling 10,000 units in your first year, who knows? Yeah, your product absolutely may be the next biggest thing since the fidget spinner. And you end up selling 1 million units a year. Can your supplier keep up? Okay, so that's something to look at. Look at the capacity and their capabilities of growth if required. Or, if it goes the other way and you say, you know what, I need to pare back because for whatever reason, my 10,000 order is now 1,000. Will they still service you? Will they still actually, okay, no problems, we'll work with you still, even though your MOQ has come right down, your order quantity, has come right down. So something to consider. Again, common thread time. Quality control systems. Look at quality control with respect to trying to select the right Chinese manufacturer. Make sure they've got their quality controls in place. And again, if you can't come over to China yourself, hire that third-party auditing process in order to go around and ask the questions and get them to look at the process and all of the paperwork that is in place for it as well. Pricing and terms, making sure that everything matches up. You might find a really good contract manufacturer that's like crazy high prices that you just can't move forward with. And again, if it's really, really low, why is it really low? It's maybe it's, they're not actually doing it, subcontracting out, and they're just a front for the business. Again, due diligence, look at all the rest of it. There's something else to plan for is lead times and delivery capabilities, making sure that they have internal understanding of the logistics, particularly in today's sort of climate, which I'm not going to touch on clearly. But it's the last one I want to touch on here before we move on to the last question is financial stability. If you are looking for a long-term relationship or potentially putting your product into a supplier / partner, which is really what you want to be looking for is in the long term, make sure they're stable from a financial point of view. And how do you do that? Well, that's easy. It's part of your due diligence. You can actually, in fact, I believe we offer a service that does something very similar to that.
Yeah, we do. We do a full due diligence package. But for example, legal records check is, I think, going to find out whether they've got sort of court rulings against them and things like that, which could mean they've had a hefty fine or one of the directors has gone to prison or something like that. Which obviously this speaks to the stability of the supplier.
Yeah, definitely. And another one, I just want to quickly touch on this one, communication. Okay. Here in China, it's very, very easy. You see this as a very, very common thing. You'll see this in a lot of suppliers where they have a pretty good English speaking person, but there's zero technology knowledge. Okay. Or It's even more common. You got the technical guys, but they can't speak English.
Yeah.
All right. So both of those are a dangerous situation to get yourself into. What you're really, really looking for is a technical salesperson, or at least your project manager. In other words, that someone that's technically minded can speak really good English. The perfect scenario, obviously, is working with a foreign-owned company, or where you've got foreigners in the top management and key positions like project management. So that's your perfect storm coming together right there.
Absolutely.
So communication is a really, really big thing.
All right, great.
Okay.
Well, we're cooking today. So
let's wrap this up. Let's move on to the last one.
The last one, number 10, a question that's been asked before. Can Chinese manufacturers provide samples before full production?
Well, the simple answer is yes. And I would say a simpler answer is you need to insist on this. Okay. Because there's all sorts of suppliers out there. There's good suppliers, there's bad suppliers. And this is all about how do you select the right supplier to work with, and some of the horror stories that come along with it, hence the top 10 questions.
Yep.
So it's really important that you ask for samples for a number of reasons. One, I've already talked about, because it's your product and only you have the design authority to sign anything off. But on top of that, you got to look at the quality assurance. You need to look at the design validation. You need to make sure that the product works. You need to make sure that you've got a working product that you test the market with and validate the market. So what you're expecting from a sales point of view, you may have the fantastic product in your mind, okay? But when you put this to market, you don't want to be ordering 10,000 in one go without actually validating the market purchase power, okay? So it's really important that you get product out there into the marketplace to get first-hand experience feedback and potential gauge with respect to how many units or what's the upsell or purchasing likelihood on a product. So all of these are really, really important from a sample point of view. Now, I've already talked about pre-production. That's a really, really important stage when it comes to sort of the MPI process. And that is all about getting early products into the marketplace. You can use those for marketing. You can use those for video. You can use those for all sorts. So it's really, really important that you insist that you get samples at not just a pre-production, but the first off prototype. Get a sample. Don't just rely on one prototype being made. I would always suggest to the customers I'm working with is at least 2, optimally 4. Okay. In other words, 1 for us, 1 for you. That's okay. Never just 1, because if we send it to you, then you provide feedback. We don't know what you're looking at. We've got to remember what the prototype looked like. So, but if we've got 2 units, now we've got 1, you got 1, and we can actually look at it together and actually understand, okay, this needs to be changed, or this is a good feature, or that needs to change. So need to get samples all the way through the manufacturing process. I think that is basically where we're coming from on this. From a samples point of view. Again, I could go on and on and on, but each of these questions, making them each 1 hour long, but
it's a quick tour through some of the key ones. I mean, with samples, really, maybe the title of that question, rather than can I get samples from my Chinese manufacturer, should be should I get samples? I suppose there's a scenario.
Why should I insist?
There's a scenario where they might be rushing you into production and not giving you samples throughout, the MPI process, as we would call it. That's not a good thing.
No, that's right. And it works the other way around. If, we work with customers that this is their first product into market, and they are very, very keen to get into production as soon as possible. And in some cases where you've got a crowdfunding activity, there are certain milestones that you need to reach. And part of those milestones is delivering the product to the customers that have actually pledged money. Therefore, there's a lot of pressure in order to skip steps in the process. Please don't do that. please don't do that. It's dangerous from both sides. So, yeah, I think maybe we should have another whole 1 hour or maybe 30 minutes anyway of why you should insist on getting samples from your supplier.
That'll be a good future one. If you're listening and you like that idea, contact us, let us know, and we can pencil that in soon for sure. But yeah, that's your top 10 FAQs. Don't forget to go back to the podcast from a week or so ago, which was the first 5 questions. Then you've got the full set to listen to. Paul, it's been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Adrian. And I look forward to being back next time.
Absolutely. And to all the listeners, thank you. And we will be back next week.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sophie's Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.